To the urgent question, Dame Priti Patel, Shadow Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for FCDO if she'll make a statement regarding the situation on Iran.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Iran's horrific attacks on protesters have shocked the world. In recent days, the scale of the violence and brutality has become clearer. Reports suggest many thousands of people across Iran have been killed and many more arrested in what has been a brutal and bloody repression against those exercising their right to public protest. There have been a range of estimates for casualties and detentions. However, the internet blackout imposed by the authorities, which we've also condemned, and which has only recently started to relax, makes it impossible at the moment to reach a reliable figure. As one young Iranian woman chillingly told the BBC, we all know someone who has been killed. What is clear from the reports is the scale of the killing, the brutality of the crackdown, and the bravery of the protesters. As the Foreign Secretary said, the Iranian people have shown extreme courage in the face of brutality and repression. We condemn these horrific attacks on those exercising the right to peaceful protests in the strongest possible terms. The government committed to this House that we would hold the Iranian authorities accountable, and that is exactly what we are doing. Yesterday, we announced a sweeping package of sanctions against the Iranian authorities for a number of serious human rights violations. This included designations of the Minister of the Interior, police chiefs, and prolific IRGC members for their role in recent brutality against protesters. We continue to work with our international partners to tackle the threat posed by Iran and to hold the Iranian regime to account via a range of means. Most recently, we led the call for a special session of the Human Rights Council on the 23rd of January. We are pleased that the Council has voted to extend the independent fact-finding mission to collect the evidence of the authorities' human rights violations, and we will continue to support those efforts. We continue to monitor developments closely and will not cease in our demands to Iran to protect fundamental freedoms, including access to information and communications. We are also continuing to take robust action to protect UK interests from Iranian state threats. Those threats are unacceptable. They must and will be defended against at every turn. We will continue to work with our allies and partners to improve regional stability and prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. Mr. Speaker, the UK will continue to challenge the actions of the Iranian regime, and we stand proudly on the side of freedom and human rights.
Dame Priti Patel.
Mr. Speaker, the brutal crackdown on brave Iranians fighting for their basic rights and freedom continues. The reports are shocking, Mr. Speaker. We have now seen that tens of thousands have been killed, hundreds of thousands have been injured. Some are even saying 30,000 people have died. These are warlike casualty rates. Yet the condemnation and response is weak. And I ask the Minister, what is the British government doing with our allies to neutralise the regime's tools of repression? The government has announced new sanctions. The Minister has spoken about that. But what is being done to crack down on sanctions evasion, which is fueling the Iranian regime's repression, including oil sales and cryptocurrency usage? What steps are being taken to weaken the regime's terrorist proxies? Is the government tracking the regime's illegal funding sources to ensure that UK financial systems and institutions are not facilitating or hosting funds used to target Iranian citizens in Britain with hostile attacks? On the IRGC, the EU has chosen to prescribe them. What is the government's response? We know that the Jonathan Hall review concluded nearly 9 months ago. So when will emergency and essential measures to take action against the IRGC come to Parliament? We cannot wait, and this side of the House will support emergency legislation. Mr. Speaker, the US build-up of naval and air force assets in the Middle East is well documented and reported and has prompted some reported contacts between the US and Iran. So will the Minister say what discussions have been held with the US government about their intentions, and is the UK involved in any contacts between the US and Iran? What plans the Minister making for British assets and the protection of personnel and British nationals in the region should the US decide to strike? Is there a scenario in which the UK might be involved in potential action? How will ministers ensure that they are at the table? And what planning and cooperation is underway to assess any commercial disruption within the region should action materialise? This is not the time to be silent, and Britain must stand up for the Iranian people and confront this vile, despotic regime with strength and resolve.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for the questions. Going through them in turn, we have taken a series of steps in order to ensure that anyone wishing to support the Iranian government in this country must meet a much higher threshold to do so. We have done that through introducing 550 sanctions, some of those introduced by the last government, some of which we have built on, and I'll come to the sanctions that we announced yesterday in due course. In relation to the FIRS scheme, where we have now put Iran at the very top of the measures, that implies additional reporting requirements on those who would seek to act here. That provides new options to our services and our police force should those seeking to act for Iran attempt to do so in the UK. This House has heard from me, and I know she knows from her time as Home Secretary, about the extent of threat Iran poses to the UK. I want to reassure the House that we continue to treat that with the utmost seriousness that it requires, and we believe that the legislative steps that we have taken already in relation to FIRS, we believe the increase in sanctions, and we believe implementing the Hall Review will all further increase our defences against such action. She asks about discussions in recent days. We have been in regular discussions with all of our regional partners. She will be aware, I'm sure, of commentary over the last few days about further conversations between the Iranians and the United States. I don't wish to get ahead of the direct participants from the dispatch box, but as you would expect, we are in regular discussions with all those with an interest. We want to see, as I said in my response to her, we want to see Iran having no prospect of achieving a nuclear weapon. A diplomatic process to that effect is necessary, and we support all efforts by both the United States and our other partners to seek to assure that. She asks for plans on assets and what scenarios may entail. She'll appreciate why I won't be drawn into speculation in any great detail, but these are clearly very, very delicate moments for Iran. There has been, as she rightly says, very widespread loss of life on the streets of Iran. I will take this opportunity also to say, Mr. Speaker, I know that for many British Iranians, there is great anguish about the lack of contact they have been able to have with their families in Iran. I feel that most acutely for British people still detained by the Iranian regime, but it is obviously an experience felt quite widely across the country. The British Iranian community make an important contribution to this country, and I understand the anguish they feel over these recent days.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Emily Thornberry.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to turn to the threat that Iran poses to people here in Britain. The Intelligence and Security Committee has said that since 2022, the risk appetite of the Iranian regime to attempt assassinations of dissidents and journalists in the UK has increased significantly. We need effective collaboration between the police and the intelligence services in order to protect ourselves, but also particularly those of Iranian heritage, against the Iranian regime's use of wide-ranging and persistent threats, including physical threats, harassment and intimidation. So what is being done to prevent attacks on media freedom in the UK by the Iranian regime, like the stabbing of Paria Zarati in March 2024?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'll repeat to the House the message I gave the Iranian ambassador on one of our first interactions. Any violence on the streets of the UK which is linked back to Iran, whatever they may think about the origin of those individuals or the press coverage that they might supply, will be treated in the very most senior serious terms by the British government, and I have left the Iranian ambassador and indeed all of our Iranian contacts in no doubt about the strength of our feeling on these questions.
James MacCleary, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've been watching developments in Iran with anger and disgust. By some accounts, as many as 30,000 Iranians may now have been killed during the regime's brutal crackdown on peaceful protests, leaving relatives to sift through piles of body bags. There can be no doubt that Iran's leaders have perpetrated crimes against humanity on a catastrophic scale. It is utterly intolerable. The UK has a responsibility to hold Iran's leaders to account. The government must take concrete steps to ensure that those responsible will one day face justice, including sanctioning the senior leadership, which the government has already taken very welcome steps in the right direction on, using British satellites to collect evidence, pursuing action through the United Nations, opening a case at the ICC, and proscribing the IRGC. So will the Minister tell me how the government will hold Iran's leaders to account, and will the Minister commit today to those concrete measures I just outlined? And what is being done working multilaterally with our partners to apply sustained pressure to make Iran drop its nuclear ambitions and ensure it never acquires a nuclear weapon?
Mr. Speaker, I set out to the Shadow Foreign Secretary some of the steps we are taking. I'm grateful for the support of the Liberal Democrats on the sanctions package that we announced yesterday, and I can confirm to the Honourable Member that we continue to be in very urgent talks indeed with a whole range of our partners about developments in Iran. We must see the fundamental rights of Iranians respected.
Catherine West.
And could I commend the Minister for coming to the House and his excellent work and that of his officials in bringing forward further sanctions yesterday and last week. And could I also commend the position of discussions and talks with European partners, Canadians and all others who are involved in the current very, very sensitive discussions. And could I ask him, could he speak with Home Office officials or his counterparts at ministerial level regarding the sophistication required for certain asylum applications which might come forward in the coming months, so that we can ensure that we send a loud message that there will not be any asylum for those who have been part of this recent crackdown?
As the House would expect, my honourable friend asks important questions, and I will take that up with my ministerial colleagues, and I thank her for the attention.
Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Within hours of the Hamas massacres, protesters and marchers were organising against Israel. Yes. And yet here we are, weeks later, when the Iranian regime is murdering and torturing its citizens by the tens of thousands. Still no marches, still no protests. What does the Minister think that says about the prejudices of such activists?
Mr. Speaker, I know the honourable gentleman, the former Deputy Prime Minister, pays great attention to developments in the region. He'll know that there have been protests outside the Iranian embassy and very disturbing counter-protests in support of the crackdown of the regime. I find anyone expressing that view on the streets of Britain absolutely staggering in the face of the horrors that we're seeing.
Dan Carden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is an evil regime that is murdering and torturing tens of thousands of its own people, and I'm pleased that this chamber is giving it regular attention. President Trump promised that help was on the way to these protesters, and I want to add my voice to ask that the British government hears the calls of the protesters and that we think very carefully about how we can give genuine support to these remarkable, brave people.
As the Foreign Secretary has already said, these are incredibly courageous protesters. One can hardly bear to hear the accounts from within Iran, such as those that have been able to circumvent the internet ban. And our thoughts are with them, and the actions that we are taking, including those we announced yesterday, are a demonstration of Britain's continued commitment to them.
Sir John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Foreign Affairs Committee were told by the Iranian ambassador that 80% of the deaths were the responsibility of ISIS-style terrorists. Will the Minister continue to give every support to journalists, human rights activists and all those seeking to uncover the evidence to demonstrate those who are truly responsible in the Iranian regime and to refer them potentially for prosecution to the International Criminal Court?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. It's one of the reasons why it was so important to us to ensure that the independent fact-finding mission is voted through by the United Nations to continue its work, and then we will see who really was responsible for these deaths.
Thanks, Frith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for his work and his statement on this. I want to raise the testimony of a constituent in Bury North, a British Iranian woman who fled Iran after being arrested 3 times for campaigning for women's and children's rights, and she was raped and tortured in detention. Since the latest events, she has received only brief calls from family before all communications have been cut. Her relatives report people being shot in the streets, women and children killed, bodies withheld unless families pay large sums based on the amount of bullets used to kill, and almost no access to food, water, medicine, power or cash for those living in fear. Can the Minister say what the government is doing to document and preserve this evidence and testimony, whether the status of the Iranian embassy and regime-linked assets in the UK is under active review, and how we are supporting British Iranian families who fear the worst for those that they love back home?
I thank my honourable friend for sharing the testimony of his constituent, and I know there are others across the country with similar experiences. We are aware of a range of reports along the lines that he describes. I've set out some of the steps that we will be taking in relation to the evidence collection that he described. We see the role of the independent fact-finding mission as absolutely vital to provide a United Nations-backed method by which the evidence can be preserved and accountability can be seen.
Mr. Foord.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In response to the unilateral US action in Venezuela, the government merely said that it was waiting to establish all the facts. This while President Trump said that he doesn't need international law and that he's only constrained by his own morality or his own conscience. In advance of any US unilateral action against Iran, can the Minister reassure the House that this time the government will speak up for the use of force when it is in compliance with international law?
Mr. Speaker, as the House knows, this government is a strong supporter of international law. Everything that we do is consistent with that principle, but for the reasons set out to the Shadow Foreign Secretary, I won't be commenting on hypothetical scenarios.
Priti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the sanctions that have been announced, including to prolific IRGC members? On the weekend, residents in Huddersfield took part in demonstrations to highlight the brutal repression, particularly of the Kurdish community in Iran and Syria. And as my constituents have said to me, many of the UK Iranian community are concerned for their safety and safety of members of their family in Iran. So what assurances can the Minister give to me for my residents? And also, what else can he say about making sure that we prescribe the IRGC? Thank you.
I'm grateful to my honourable friends for raising the concerns of her constituents in Huddersfield. I know she referred to her Kurdish community in Huddersfield, and I know that there was a great deal of concern amongst Kurdish communities across the region, and we've discussed events in northeast Syria recently in this House, so I hope Mr. Speaker will forgive me if I pass brief comments. Since that discussion, I'm very glad that there has been a ceasefire in relation to northeast Syria, which is a source of considerable reassurance to those living there. On her important question about the prescription of the IRGC, we're committed to the findings of the Hall Review, which set out the need to have a state analogous process for prescription, and we're committed to bringing forward legislation to achieve that.
Lewes.
Well, will you please get on with doing that? The fact is that the Independent Reviewer of Terrorism has signalled a way in which something analogous to prescription can be done to the IRGC, even though it is a state body. Does the Minister accept that there is an analogy between the IRGC and the Gestapo and Hitler's SS, both of which were designated as criminal organisations by the Nuremberg Tribunal. Would he be as slow to act if we were operating in that context? For goodness sake, get on with it and implement the findings and recommendations of Jonathan Hall.
Mr. Speaker, I want the House to be in absolutely no doubt. The IRGC is already sanctioned in its entirety in the UK. The sanctions that we announced on Monday included the Minister of Interior. There is no pulling of punctures by the British government in response to the sanctions. And I would say gently to him and the other side of the House that we're moving with considerably more alacrity on these questions than the other benches did in their period in government.
Stella Crease.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is right when he says that our constituents who have relatives in Iran, who are also British Iranians themselves, are looking to us for clear action. I must press him on this point about prescription, though. He is aware, as has already been raised, that the European Union has added the IRGC to its terrorist list, as has Australia, Canada and America in prescription. Now, 3 weeks ago, when I raised this with the Foreign Secretary, she talked about the importance of us taking action in concert with our allies. Given that our allies have already prescribed the IRGC, can you at least give us some comfort that that legislation will come forward forthwith and this is an urgent priority for the government?
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for the question. I want to see this legislation as soon as possible. It is Home Office legislation and it will need to go through the House in the usual way, but we're treating it as a matter of urgency. The reason why, as I know this House has heard before, Mr. Speaker, we think the Jonathan Hall review is important, is it addresses itself precisely to this question of the difference between a state actor and a terrorist. I was the head of the terrorism response team in the Foreign Office. I know the difference in threat profile between a state-based actor and one which is not, and that's important why we get this legislation right.
Mr. Blatton.
Human cost to the Iranian authorities' violence. As many as 6,000 protesters, people like me and you, have been killed, been murdered, with over 10,000 arrested, and there's a real risk of extrajudicial execution. Political prisoners, including children, are being tortured in prison. Can the government give us a reassurance that they're having conversation with the US authorities ahead of the US-Iran talks and making clear to them that the lives and safety of these protesters, particularly the ones who are currently in prison, is of immense importance in the negotiations as they go forward?
Mr. Speaker, I can confirm we're in regular contact with our US and other counterparts on all of these questions.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to associate myself with the remarks that have been made by a number of members of this House, particularly the remarks by the member for Liverpool, Walton. I continue to advocate ways in which we can degrade, we being the West, degrade the ability of the IRGC's ability to kill protesters, such as targeted strikes on arms depots. But I wish to turn my remarks to the question of prescription, and I'm grateful the government's moving forward with ways to look at prescribing the IRGC. But there is also another organisation called the Islamic Human Rights Commission, which is linked to the Iranian regime, according to the Times and others. And just this weekend, they were seen on the streets of London with placards in support of the Ayatollah, with chants in support of the Ayatollah. But even more depressing than that, I've heard reports from Iranian freedom protesters that they have been beaten up, including women, when they have attempted to hold these people to account outside their own centre. So I would ask ministers, when they're looking at this question of prescription, to look at other groups like that, which go under the guise of standing up for human rights, but doing anything but.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his advocacy on Iran and for his question. We are aware of some of these reports of pro-regime protests in the UK. I can't comment, as he would expect, on the process of sanction or indeed prescription review, but I've taken his remarks to heart.
Mr. Speaker, I join with others in expressing horror at the stories that are coming out of Iran and the enormous death toll, and I hope the Minister will take advantage of the international institutions, which he has from this dispatch box expressed confidence in the past, to bring a case at the ICC, particularly against the leaders in Iran. But I have a secondary question, which is this. If the Iranian people, through their courage, are able to throw off their oppressors, are we able to say that there is a plan to support whatever may emerge after that event?
Mr. Speaker, for reasons I'm sure the honourable gentleman will appreciate, I don't want to be drawn into speculating about regime change in Iran. The question at the moment is the rights of the Iranian protesters. That is what we want to see protected. That is what we are so horrified to see violated in the way that the report suggests it is being violated. And that is where I want to focus my remarks today.
Chopper. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last few weeks, I've had heartbreaking conversations with Iranian and British Iranian constituents and letters from many more. They have fragments of information about what is coming out of Iran, and what those fragments show is many first-hand examples of horrific violence, killing, and relatives unaccounted for. I'm glad to hear about the step up in sanctions and the commitment around the IGRC. I would welcome any reassurances the Minister can give on what we're doing with our allies to break the internet blackout so we can actually get information out of Iran about what is really happening, both for evidence purposes in future, but also to help the families that I represent find out what's happened to their loved ones.
I know there is a large British Iranian community in Kensington. I join with him in sharing in their anguish. The most important step that needs to be taken to lift this internet blockade is for the Iranian authorities to take that decision, to allow the Iranian people access to information which is their right. I won't comment any further on some of the operational elements that he touches on, but it is absolutely vital, and I repeat my call today from the dispatch box as I made when last we discussed it. The Iranians must allow their people access to the internet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In answer to questions from members on both sides of the House in relation to the prescription of the IRGC, the Minister has rightly said he wants to see that legislation come forward, but we still don't have a fixed timetable. Given the EU have prescribed them, the United States, Canada, Australia, doesn't he think that it shows Iran incredible weakness from the United Kingdom not to be following suit? And furthermore, given Hezbollah were part of the government of Lebanon when the previous government prescribed them, that there's plenty of precedent to just get on and do it.
I don't think that the Iranian government's interpretation of the actions of the British government in recent weeks is one of weakness. This is a far-ranging sanctions package announced on Monday, and it follows a whole range of actions, some of which I described to the Shadow Foreign Secretary in response. The point that the honourable gentleman makes, which is a fair one, is given the urgency of this situation, are we taking all of the steps that we need to? We think the whole review is a substantial contribution to this question around the risks of the IRGC. We want to follow it carefully and make sure we do this properly. That does not mean that we cannot act swiftly through our sanctions regime in the way that we announced yesterday.
Ballinger.
Can I join the Minister in condemning Iran's brutal crackdown on peaceful protesters in recent weeks? But it's also important that those that do Iran's bidding on the streets of the UK, particularly targeting those peaceful protesters, are held to account. So I welcomed last year the decision for the UK to put Iran on the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme. Can the Minister update us on the impact that is having on that crackdown Iran is trying to do on our own streets?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the question. Mr. Speaker, the way that that hostile states have sought to take advantage of the freedoms in this country is by failing to register when they have agents on our soil seeking to act on their behalf in whatever way. The Foreign Influence Registration Scheme means that it's now an offence not to declare if you are acting as an agent for another country. It may well be that Iran does not, or those seeking to act for Iran, do not register under FIRS. If they do not, they are committing an offence, and I have every confidence in our services and police force that such people will be found.
Dr. Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I share in the huge concern and outrage that's been expressed across the House for the brave Iranian citizens who've been so brutally repressed by the regime. It's essential that the UK does everything possible within the framework of international law to support their struggle for freedom, and I welcome the new sanctions that the Minister has announced on the Iranian leadership. On those principles of international law, will the Minister confirm that the UK will not support or enable in any way, including intelligence sharing, any violation of international law by the United States or any other power in Iran?
Mr. Speaker, I've set out our commitments to international law and I won't provide hypotheticals.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Government's announcements today about new sanctions on individuals responsible for the brutal treatment of protesters and the vile murder of 30,000 people. But human rights abuses on this scale are never the responsibility of a handful of individuals. They're systemic, they're statewide actions. And that's why I'd like to press the Minister again about the decision to prescribe the IRGC. And I note that legislation needs to be carefully drawn up. But this House has rapidly passed emergency legislation to save British steel, to update medical training regulations more recently. Can the Minister confirm that we are moving at pace to introduce emergency legislation to fully prescribe the IRGC? And can he also update us about the UK's efforts to bring this matter to the UN Security Council?
Mr. Speaker, as I set out in my statement, we brought this to the United Nations Human Rights Council. We will continue to raise this in the United Nations in the way that you would expect. I just want to reassure the House that I understand this point that gentlemen across the House are making, and ladies, of course. But we are already in a position where we have sanctioned the entirety of the IRGC. The sanctions that we have announced are far-reaching, as indeed as are the first steps. We will be bringing forward legislation. I wouldn't wish to get ahead of the Leader of the House in setting out what the timetable would be.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The IRGC and the so-called morality police have murdered 30,000 people on the streets of Iran. If people are wounded, they pursued them to their homes and hospitals and murdered them. Now, it's not clear to me why, given the length of time we've had to consider the prescription of the IRGC in its entirety, now, where we have clear evidence of our allies prescribing the IRGC in its entirety, why is it that the government are not bringing this forward? But just before the weekend, I assisted a cross-party letter to go to the Prime Minister offering support to fast-track the legislation through both houses. The will is there on both sides. So will the Minister, obviously he can't answer this from the dispatch book now, go back to the Foreign Secretary and the Home Secretary and get this done?
I hear the passion in the Honourable Gentleman's voice. We are taking this issue incredibly seriously. This is a far-reaching sanctions package. We will come back to the House, obviously, once the Leader of the House is in a position to set out what the timetable of the legislation might be.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the brutal, violent, illegal repression of Iranian civilians by this regime shows just how difficult it is for civilian populations to rise up against their oppressors, as is so often demanded by people around the world? And would he further pay tribute to the young women who have been protesting on the streets with great courage at this incredibly difficult time for their country?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. I'm sure many members of the House will have seen the pictures of female protesters on the streets of Iran, not just in Tehran, but across the country. It's impossible not to be moved by their bravery, and I'm grateful for my honourable friend giving me a chance to reflect on that.
Mark Pritchard.
Speaker, thankfully the Iranian influence in the South Caucasus and Central Asia is in decline, but one country where it seems to be in the ascendancy is in Georgia. So does the Minister share my concern of allegations that there are up to 13,000 Iranian companies registered in Georgia, 700 in one small building in one small village, and there is potential sanctions busting and sanctions evasion? That money feeds into the Iranian regime. It funds their malign and malevolent activity across the world. So would he take it up with the Foreign Secretary to investigate whether it's true that Iran is funding its regime using the back door into the Black Sea of Georgia?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman speaks with considerable expertise. He'll know that I won't comment on further sanctions from the dispatch box. I would comment that Iran's influence in its near abroad and beyond has usually proven to be malign. We can see the long scars of Iran's influence in Lebanon, in Gaza, in a whole range of contexts. And so I warn all of our allies to be very careful about the relationship with Iran.
John Monk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I've had to my register of interest. The Minister will be aware of my trip with colleagues from across this House as part of a parliamentary delegation to Jordan last year. And it was very clear from talking to members of the Jordanian legislatures that Iran's malign impact on the region in terms of regional security and stability is an issue of great concern to Jordan. Can he provide me with reassurance that the government are working with regional partners like Jordan in order to make sure that Iran's malign and malevolent influence on the region is withstood and held back?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I was very interested to hear of his visit to Amman. Of course, the Kingdom of Jordan is about one of our closest allies in the region. We discuss these issues with them regularly, and indeed with other regional powers affected, and I was conducting that business this morning.
Dr. Andrew Mercer.
Speaker, the IRGC Navy is busy practising the rapid deployment of sea mines, presumably with a view to closing the Straits of Hormuz, like it did between 1980 and 1988. What assessment has the government made of the threat that poses to our critical national interests, and has he considered the prepositioning of our autonomous mine hunting capability, which entered into service at the beginning of last year?
I thank my predecessor for the questions. For reasons he'll understand, I won't comment too much on the precise laydown of our defence assets. I think he refers to the regular exercises that Iran has conducted in the Straits. We are a maritime nation, as indeed are many of the nations of the Gulf, and we view questions of the free passage of trade with the seriousness that they require.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As well as funding and fueling violence across the world, the Iranian regime is once again showing its brutality on the streets. And like many honourable members, I've had constituents in my surgery appointments in tears, living in constant distress and fear of what might have happened to their families. Can the Minister outline how this government is truly doing all it can to bring pressure to bear on the Iranian regime, including with regards to embassy arrangements? And does he agree that a united message and coordinated action from us and our allies must go out, that the regime will pay a price for this horrendous violence?
I thank my honourable friend. I think he reflects the feelings of the whole House on the issues that we're describing. He asked me to comment on embassy arrangements. I can confirm to the House that while we did withdraw staff from our embassy in Tehran temporarily, we have now returned them and our embassy is functioning. Our embassy, of course, operates under the same restrictions that the rest of Iran currently operates under. I know it is a source of real anguish to British Iranians, as we've heard throughout the course of this afternoon. We cannot provide consular assistance in Iran in the way that we can in other nations, particularly at a moment of such acute restriction. But our ambassador is back in Tehran alongside his team, and we will do everything we can.
Sir Alex Shelby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, China has no regards for human rights whatsoever and is known to be trading with Iran, which is enabling them to slaughter their own citizens. So may I ask the Minister what assessment the Foreign Office is making of the details of that trade and what action it is taking?
I won't speculate on further sanctions from the dispatch box, but of course we have kept a close eye on Iran's interactions with other states, both China and Russia. This government imposed sanctions on Iran for trading with Russia for the use of weapons in Ukraine. Clearly, with Iran conducting such a brutal crackdown on its own people, all members of the Security Council will wish to consider the nature of their relationships.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for his tone and what is a very grave and incredibly grave situation, and thank him for that. Some 6,500 killed. it seems headshots, blinded and murdered, thousands injured, and it is estimated some 60,000 in prison. Whilst it is positive news that there may be talks between our closest allies, the USA, and the despotic regime in Iran, we can never be complacent about the present situation. So will the Minister press to secure the release of political prisoners and detained protesters, and further ensure that there is access granted to assess the prisons and meet with the victims of the protest response so far? Thank you.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his care on these issues. We have been focused with the Iranian authorities, as he would expect, on the questions of consular access to our own nationals detained, but he raises important basic rights questions about the rights to a fair trial, the rights to access to a lawyer, the rights for access for families, and we do call on the Iranians to show those basic courtesies to their own people.
That completes the UQ. We'll let the front benches change over.